Hello, I'm Jeremy, and welcome to another episode of RevUs Reviews. Horror is a genre that I have mixed feelings on. I like horror comedies like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, silly B-movies like The Stuff, and psychological horrors like The Twilight Zone. What I don't like are bloody slashers like Friday the 13th, creepy supernatural jump scare fests like The Nun, and gloomy, horrifying, depressing films like The Exorcist. Unfortunately, the latter films are what make up a majority of the horror genre. And while we have had some good modern horror comedies, like Chillerama and Dude Bro Party Massacre 3, we just don't have any modern horrors that scare without being disturbing. This brings us to today's subject, the infamous horror flick Troll 2. A family consisting of Diana and Michael Waits, their young son Joshua, and their teenage daughter Holly are participating in some kind of foreign exchange thing with a town called Nilbog. Essentially, they get to live in the house of a Nilbog family while the Nilbog family moves into their house. However, not all is as it seems. The townsfolk act really creepy, and Joshua keeps getting messages from his dead grandfather, warning him about the people in Nilbog. We soon discover that these people are not actually people, but goblins, who kill their victims by feeding them green food, which turns them into half-man, half-plant beings, which are the goblins' favorite food. Armed with this knowledge, Joshua and Grandpa Seth try to stop the goblins from turning the other family members into plant men and get out of Nilbog with their lives. I both genuinely and ironically enjoy Troll 2. But mostly genuinely. Now you may be saying to yourself, Jeremy, how can a film like this be genuinely scary? To that I say you're thinking of the wrong kind of scary. One might not think to compare Troll 2 and The Twilight Zone, but in fact Troll 2's methods of scaring and suspense are pretty similar to that of The Twilight Zone. The film scares its audience not with blood, gore, and creepy creatures, but through psychological means. The film uses atmosphere and suspense to get a rise out of its audience. A good example of this is the opening narration. While not much scary happens, the atmosphere of Seth's narration helps build engagement to the audience, and the fear and panic in Joshua's voice builds a natural sense of fear. And that's the main reason I like Troll 2. It slides in that sweet spot between Ed Wood and Wes Craven, being effective enough to scare the audience, me, but not enough to the point where I feel disturbed. Now, I'm not saying Troll 2 is a horror masterpiece on the same wavelength as Psycho or Nightmare on Elm Street, as the film does have its problems. For instance, while the horror aspect of this movie is pretty good, the comedy is pretty weak. Despite Wikipedia saying this is a horror comedy, there are few jokes and even fewer that are funny. The main area of the film where this problem is shown is the scene where Elliot goes into Holly's room. The lines in this scene are some of the most pitiful attempts at comedy you will ever see, with one of the jokes being straight up homophobic. And speaking of problems, let's talk about the acting. The acting in this film ranges from Neil Breen levels to pretty good. Michael and Diana are horrendous actors. Granted, the actor for Michael never acted in anything else, and aside from Troll 2, the actor from Diana only acted in two other films, the a documentary about Troll 2 called Best Worst Movie and some film from the 1990s called Gunpoint. But still, they are awful. Michael has an incredibly unconvincing delivery, and some of the stuff he says is just plain stupid. Like, a good example is, "You can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it." While Diana is so emotionless, she makes Stephen Wright look like Bobcat Goldthwait. And of course, there's the scene everyone knows this movie for. However, most of the other actors are pretty good. The Nilbog townspeople are effectively creepy. Elliot and his friends are fine actors. Sorry. And have a natural chemistry. Holly is off a couple times, but she's pretty decent. And the best actors are Grandpa Seth and Joshua. Grandpa Seth is really convincing as an actor and almost seems like he could be in an actual movie. And for a child actor, the kid who played Joshua is fantastic. Now, obviously not all child actors are bad, but it's hard to get a good performance out of a child, even if they're really into the project. Case in point, Mara Wilson and Thomas and the Magic Railroad. But somehow, Claudio Fragasso found a way to make a child act not only good, but better than most adults. The actor for Joshua puts so much emotion and believability in his lines, I wouldn't be surprised if he got a case of method acting. There is no point in the film where the actor for Joshua looks bored or disinterested. In every scene, he's fantastic. A good example of this is the scene where Elliot is scared that there's a goblin, but it turns out it's just Elliot. Even if you know it's actually Elliot, Joshua's acting, as well as the music and atmosphere of the scene, helps bring it alive and gives the audience a sense of fright. Now that we talked about the actors, let's talk about the characters they play. Joshua is very similar to Lizzie from Drop Dead Fred in a lot of ways. Both are very insecure and timid. Both have an imaginary friend of sorts, and they're both able to conquer their fears in order to do the right thing. Joshua's the kind of protagonist that's tossed into a random situation and has to think and find a way out of it, similar to John McClane from Die Hard. Grandpa Seth is a very interesting character. He's one of those characters in horror movies that tries to warn the main characters not to go in danger and helps Joshua save his family. He is kind of a team dynamic with Joshua as they work together to stop the goblins. Another interesting thing is that he's shown throughout the movie as a ghost. However, unlike Drop Dead Fred, who can only be seen by Lizzie and other imaginary friends, there are two instances where characters other than Joshua see Seth. One is when Holly is dancing in her room for some reason, and Grandpa Seth accidentally appears in her mirror and she screams. The other is when Joshua and Grandpa went into one of the goblin people, and he talks to Seth like he recognizes him. This brings me to a theory I have about Grandpa Seth. My theory is that Grandpa Seth is a goblin who left his kind because he felt guilty about eating humans. He turned into a human permanently and blended into human life in a similar way to Octodad. He eventually fell in love, got married, and had Diana, who then married Michael, and the both of them had Holly and Joshua. Seth wanted to warn his family about the goblins so they wouldn't attack them, but Michael, Diana, and Holly would never believe him. I mean, would you? But Joshua was at an impressionable age, so Seth told Joshua of the goblins and read stories about them. And when he died from unknown causes, he came back as a ghost to keep warning Joshua about the goblins. This may sound preposterous, but there is some evidence for this. Evidence number 1. Seth's past is never explained. Evidence number 2. Grandpa Seth is the only human character, aside from the weird goblin lady and Joshua, who knows things about the goblins. And evidence number 3. Like I said before, one of the goblins talked to Seth like he recognized him. Mind you, this is only a theory, and this likely didn't come across the minds of anyone who worked on Troll 2. But it's still pretty interesting. Michael and Diana are pretty much two-dimensional. They have barely any personality and don't do much except be the doubting parents. Not much to say about them. As teenage girl characters go, Holly is okay. She isn't a brat and she doesn't have an obnoxious Valley Girl accent, which automatically makes her a good character. She also has good chemistry with her boyfriend Elliot, and she has a few good lines. The only problem with her is that she wants to separate Elliot from his friends, which one is a major sign of an abusive relationship, and two isn't relevant to the plot at all. Elliot is a fine character. He has good chemistry with his friends, making Holly more of a monster for wanting to separate them, and he has a good personality. Same with his friends. They aren't really that complex of characters. The only interesting one is Arnold, the oh my god kid. And that's only because of the line and how he gets captured by the Goblin Queen. Speaking of which, let's talk about the goblins. One of the criticisms people have about this movie is that the bad guys are goblins instead of trolls like the title suggests. But I refute that argument because this movie already has nothing to do with the original troll. I bet you didn't even know there was an original troll. And I like the idea of goblins that turn people into half-man, half-plants. That's a really creative idea that I haven't seen before. And while the idea is pretty ridiculous, the goblins themselves are pretty scary. They're intimidating villains, and they look simultaneously scary and funny. And when they're humans, they're effectively creepy characters. Although it makes Michael and Diane even more stupid for not recognizing this. Also, there's the weird Goblin Queen. She's okay. Not as memorable as the goblins, but she's enjoyably over the top and effectively creepy. Finally, let's talk about the theme song. Most good horror films have a good theme song, like Friday the 13th and Halloween. And Troll 2's theme song is fantastic. It's like an 80s pop song combined with slasher movie music. It's both catchy and fits the mood of the opening scene, as well as the rest of the movie. In conclusion, while it has a bunch of flaws, Troll 2 is a genuinely good horror film with a creative premise and likable characters. If you haven't seen Troll 2, I recommend checking it out. You may love it for the incredibly good atmosphere and effective scare tactics like I do, or you may not see that at all and instead love it for the incredibly stupid acting, lines, and plot. But however you love it, Troll 2 is definitely an enjoyable film and has a permanent place in dumb movie history. That's all for now. Join me next time when I talk about a cult classic that has Keaton Thompson and Kel Mitchell, flying hamburgers, and an insane asylum thriller dance scene. And it's a kids' movie. See you then. Okay, one more time.
They're eating her. And then they're going to eat me.